Welcome back to Trauma and Tea.
We're here today to spill the tea on all things mental health. Sorry, Matt. We're here to spill the tea today on all things mental health and trauma related and this journey of self-discovery.
So we're really excited and honoured to have keynote speaker, bestselling author and mental health advocate, Rachel Kelly, with us today. So thank you, Rachel, for joining us. Rachel's has first-hand experience of depression, which she details in her best-selling Sunday Times book, The Black Rainbow. We're just excited to have Rachel on to discuss further her journey and her journey to well-being. So thank you, Rachel, for joining us.
Oh,
Welcome.
thank you very much.
Welcome,
I
Rachel.
have a bit of imposter syndrome when it sort of sounds like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm not sure I do. But anyway, we'll thrash it out between us.
Yeah, well, we're all here just like learning about ourselves, really. That's what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah.
But no, welcome, Rachel. Obviously, some of our listeners don't know much about you. So could you tell us a bit about yourself and how your journey began?
Yeah. So it began quite suddenly, actually. So I was in my 30s, and at that time I was working in the newsroom at the Times newspaper. And I think when we're thinking about mental health, you've always got to think about the kind of context of what's happening more broadly in your life. And my husband, still my husband, he was working in financial services. So there were two exciting jobs, but quite stressful jobs, long hours and a lot of adrenaline. And we also had two small children. But I thought I was more or less managing. And then what happened was that one night I couldn't get to sleep. Now, this doesn't sound like a big deal. I'd had bits of insomnia before, but I was lying there. And then with this insomnia, I started having some quite alarming physical symptoms. And the first thing that happened was my heart rate speeded up. I don't know either of you know that thing when you've got like a shoe in the washing machine and it's kind of going thump and you feel
Yeah.
like your heart might like jump out of your cage.
Mm.
It was quite alarming. And the next thing that happened is I felt very nauseous, like I had to throw up, but I wasn't actually sick, but I just felt really nauseous. And probably the most frightening thing that happened is that my mind sort of started racing, and I started having these what I now know to be very catastrophic thoughts. And they went along the lines of, well, if I can't get to sleep, I won't get to work. If I won't get to work, I'll lose the job. If I lose the job, lose the house, lose the mortgage, lose the children, go into care. I mean, that sounds really crazy, but it was this really quick sort of catastrophic narrative. And I sort of lay there with these racing thoughts. I remember at the time it was a bit like a skater on ice. It was just like going round and round and round, like deeper and darker and deeper and darker on the ice. I remember having that image. Anyway, the night wore on, and I was supposedly this quite kind of high functioning person. So the next morning I thought, right, refast an activity to its normal timetable, breakfast at breakfast time, lunch at lunchtime, dine at dinner time, and I'll get back to my busy multitasking, juggle kind of life. But unfortunately, these physical symptoms were just getting worse and worse. And cut a long story short, this went on. And after a second night of not sleeping, on the third day, my husband realized something was really up. And I found myself talking to a doctor in a hospital. And I said, well, I think you must be a cardiologist because I think I'm having a heart attack. I don't know what's going on. And he said, I'm actually a psychiatrist. And he sees these are classic signs of a major anxiety-driven depressive episode. So you'll have heard of the fear, fight, or flight mechanism.
Yeah.
So that mechanism had kicked in, but had gone completely haywire. And I was in this sort of state of complete sort of suspended panic. And that was the start of my journey into mental health. And yeah, I went into hospital and I had this severe episode. I was suicidal through that period. I did get better. I shut the topic down because at this point you're supposed to go, nah, but I'm in my 50s now. So we're talking 20 years
Definitely
ago.
don't look you're in your 50s. Definitely.
Stop.
Definitely not.
Well, back then, you didn't really talk about mental health at all. and I
Yeah.
didn't.
I was going to say, is this something, when this was going on, was this something that you was aware, like, did you genuinely have no clue that this was something that was mental, and did you reach out to any friends, or was it just you and your husband keeping it together because you didn't really
Yeah,
know what was
it,
going
it was
on?
it was more me, my husband, and my mum. So my mum lived really near us, and I actually found being in hospital made me worse. So I was sort of then looked after at home, but because I was a suicide risk, my mum was really involved, and she was sort of living with us pretty much, as well as the two small children. And I didn't talk that much to friends because I did feel this sort of stigma, and I felt that I was this really privileged, lucky kind of person. So what was I doing being unwell?
How dare you have anything to be upset about?
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
kept it really quiet. I only really told my news editor at work,
Mm.
and I just wanted the whole thing to go away. And I did go back to work. And what's amazing, and I think back of it now, I didn't do anything to change anything. I didn't get any therapy. I was very much on the medication route. It didn't occur to me that maybe I had quite a stressful life. It didn't occur to me that I might deserve to look after my mental health. I didn't even know you could look after your mental health. So I just went straight back into the newsroom, and I wouldn't be chatting to you now, except that then what happened is, unsurprisingly, I then had a second major episode. So the first time I was sort of off work for around 6 months, and then the second time it was really even worse. So the second time I was ill pretty much for a couple of years. And that major episode finished, well, it didn't finish because it doesn't actually finish, but I after that, so we're talking sort of 2004, 2005, quite a while ago, I actually a little bit later than that, because it wasn't like a sudden I'm all well. But after that, I decided, okay, I got to look at this topic of mental health. I got to try and understand what this is.
Yeah.
Why do we get on well? What can we do about it?
Do you think there's an element of that you got worse once you got diagnosed? Like, kind of when you realized what was going on, did you feel an element of, because you knew what it was and you didn't really know where to turn? Did you get worse from that, or did you feel like it helped on your recovery?
Well, I think at the time I wasn't so much interested in the diagnosis as the idea that there was a drug and there was some medication. And I was so ill, and I felt so awful. I didn't want to take my own life because I had a bad life. I actually had a pretty good life. I had these gorgeous kids, and pretty lovely husband and wonderful mum, but I felt so ill. So I think for me, I didn't really overly focus on being diagnosed, but I was really focused on medication. And it's like, bring it on, anything to get out of this pain. So I took a lot of different things. I took the kind of antidepressants that calm you down. I took sleeping pills for the insomnia. I took some anti-anxiety medication. And at the time, I was so happy to have something which I thought would make me better. I did have some issues with the medication because I had some quite bad side effects.
I was just going to ask, what is your opinion on medications? I haven't taken them and been through all that. Do you believe that they are helpful?
Do you know, I think it's such a tricky area because we don't really know. And I look back at my own experience, and actually one of the psychiatrists in the hospital said to me, he said, I'm going to start you on the medication. He said, you might get better anyway, or you might not. So I did take the medication, and I did get better, well enough to get back to work. I will never know for sure, was it the medication that got me better, or might have got better anyway? So I think it's a really difficult area because it's not like medication. Like, I don't know, if you cut yourself and you put on some Savlon, you can physically see that medication has made that difference.
Yeah.
So all I would say is that if somebody is really, really unwell, there's no way you could say don't take medication.
I think medication is something you should take if you feel it's right, but I also think it should just be a crutch. It should be like a plaster then. It should be a temporary fix for a long-term thing. And my problem with medication is myself, I'm not on any now. I came off everything last year personally, but I'd been on and off my meds just thrown at me since the age of 17, 18.
Oh, that is a
Um,
time,
and
yeah.
I do believe that that's when it gets dangerous, because you find yourself bouncing from one to the other to the other.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'd make 2 points on that. The first, I would agree. I'd say that in a crisis, in an absolute emergency, and in some ways, because my case was so extreme, in a way, you know, the debates weren't so relevant. What I would say now is, if it wasn't relevant, how we behaved and our lifestyle and how we thought and how we looked after ourselves, then we know that mental illness or mental health problems happen in a context. So we can change that context. And for me, I'd say now I don't take medication. And one of the things I think is you've got to be careful with is that medication can reduce people's sense of agency, that they themselves can make a difference. Because you think, well, why would I bother? I mean, I've written one book. Actually, this is the American version, but I did this with Simon and Schuster in the US. But this is about the links between nutrition and food.
massive links, massive links.
And if you just say, well, take your pill and you're sorted, you become very passive. And I work a lot with mental health charities, so I'm an ambassador for Sane and Rethink Mental Illness. And what I find with my groups is that the medication, as I say, emergencies, absolutely. But when it, as you say, when you've been taking it for a very long time, you're in a system whereby you can't do anything unless you get back to the GP, or lucky, if you're lucky, you see a psychiatrist, and you lose a sense of power. And I think that's one thing that I've become really interested in, and the other ways to give yourself that back of sense, you know, I can make a difference.
I think we're a society that relies on meds a lot and medication a lot. And I'm more the type of person now, looking back, that I believe a lot of this is about connecting with yourself and trusting yourself and taking things at your own pace and creating your own safe space for your mental health, having your own routines. If that's working part-time, for me personally, I can't work full-time. I just can't. I've got I do have fibromyalgia, but I now know that that is it's massively linked to mental health, and I physically hurt. And we did see in your book that you talk about physical pain in your book.
I mean, that link between the mental and the physical are completely, you know, they're one and the same. I think people have understood that now.
I never did, and I was going through it myself. And I couldn't understand how I could be physically hurting if I was mentally hurting, until an incident happened to me last year, and I connected it. And once I connected it, I could understand, and I changed my life. I believe I had a big remission from the longest remission I've had in a long time from fibromyalgia. I'm a lot better at dealing with it. I think there should be more education around that.
Well, and don't beat yourself up too much, because this is the model that medicine's been based on. It's the Cartesian model. So there's a French scientist called René Descartes, and he gives us the word Cartesian. And the Cartesian split is between body and mind. And still to this day, even though the experience of people like you and me who've been through this stuff, we know the complete, and lots of people know this too in the NHS, but as a practical matter, it's still split between the mental and the physical, which is bananas.
It is bananas, because now I've connected it, I can't unsee it. And actually I can be in a stressful situation but not feel stressed, but my body will tell me that I am stressed, and I will be in pain.
I think some of the physical approaches are so good, because it's all very well to say, you know, don't think of elephants, you think of elephants. So some of the cognitive approaches are really hard for people to do. But if you come at it the other way around, from the physical up to the mental, that can be a much, you know, the breathing techniques, some of the exercise techniques, the mindful techniques. But just rewinding, I'm really struck by your point, this idea of a kind of individual approach. And I think that's a big shift that's happening in mental health, and more broadly in medicine, this sort of personalized medicine. And what I would say, having have had my own therapy for years, but also having worked with a lot of therapists, is this idea that for all of us, our main relationship is with ourselves.
Yes.
I mean, that sounds so obvious, but I only really clocked that about 5 years ago. You spend more time with your own feelings, your own thoughts, your own emotions, your own stories than anybody else. So to feel mentally well, for me, it has been about the idea that working on yourself, it's not a selfish thing. That is how you can be better placed to help others.
I gotta be honest as well. I do think being somebody who's so sensitive, and I've had a really bad time with my fibro. Like there's been times that I've not been able to get out of bed for weeks.
Yeah.
There's been times I haven't been able to eat. I haven't been able to speak. I haven't been able to think. It was as if my whole world was just coming in on me, and I did used to fantasize about dying. And again, like yourself, I didn't want to kill myself because I had so much to live for, and because I have businesses, and like I felt like, oh God, I got everything. What's wrong with me? Like I shouldn't. I totally relate to your story. And I don't think it's a very indifferent story to most other people. I think we all got a sense of how should I, because especially when you're a mum and you've got a family and all this different stuff, you are kind of the top of the, the pyramid, you're kind of holding everything together. So you expect it to be strong, and that there is a stigma around it, and I totally agree. But for me personally, I'll be honest, I got a daughter who suffers with her own mental health. She had a brain tumor removed, and she was going through a lot. And she obviously during COVID, that affected a lot of people as well as kids. I would like to see things change. For example, not see a 5-day working week and a 2-day weekend. Why are we working 5 days a week? These things, like these routines you're discussing, these are the things that have made you bad, like we need to work more because that's but ideally, should we? Because I don't believe anybody should work full time like that, because it's not healthy to run a family and do all them motherly things, or like fathers, like Matt is a father himself, so he's a parent himself. It's really hard, and I think we're all under that pressure. And I would like to see a bigger shift, a bigger shift than this, bigger shift than the drugs.
I think what you're talking about really is choices and people being allowed to make choices. And I think that if I look back at my own story, I very rarely managed to make choices about lining up with what I really wanted, because the noises around me were so strong, sort of expectations and other people's expectations. And it's no disrespect to them. It was just that the way I chose to interpret, that I had to be a good mum for others, that I had to be a good employee in the newsroom at the Times, that I had a lot of outward rather than in a sense that it was okay for me to line up with what suited me. I was always looking for this sort of outward approval, outward affirmation, other people's version of what it was to be me.
You should be,
And it wasn't their fault. It was just that I was kind of trapped almost in this way of thinking. And I think one of the biggest changes for me is that it's okay to line up with what suits you. And as you say, for some people, as you rightly, a 5-day working week, a very rigid interpretation of what it is to work, what it is to be in the world, may well not suit them. Maybe some others, that's okay. But I think it comes down to just having that sense of self-respect that you are allowed to line up with what works for you.
I think my biggest problem being a mum myself is my daughter is in school, and she's asking to learn all sorts of things. Obviously, she's 14. But yet there was a time where she couldn't even discuss her feelings. We don't do enough of this in school, in my opinion. We don't sit children down and, okay, we should do it as parents as well. But I'd like to see more of that type of schooling when they're younger, because I don't believe the kids need to be knowing some of the things they know so young. Like my son is really intelligent, but he can't control his emotions, and he's off the Richter.
Well,
he can tell me algebra, but he can't tell me how he feels. I mean, I think that's a really crazy world to live in, and we've created this problem. And we've grown up in this society, and I think that bigger changes need to happen, personally.
No, I think you're absolutely right, because we know that it's at least half of mental health problems present before people are 14. And obviously, if we could get young people's mental health more on track, we've got a big problem, particularly with teenage girls at the moment. You know, if somebody's 50 and they've got mental health problems, they've probably had some really negative patterns for maybe, you know, 3 or 4 decades, and they're really hard to reverse. And we know that from, if you look at recovery rates. The truth is that young people, they're malleable, and even if they've gone off, you know, and having a difficult time, they with the right support, actually they can turn around quite quickly. But even before we deal with people who are finding life difficult, you're absolutely right. If we got things much earlier in terms of teaching some of these emotional resilience skills, and what's so silly about this is it's just not really rocket science.
It's
You
really
know,
not.
the
I'm
lesson
just going to
plans,
plug
you
something
know,
on a minute. Carry on. I'm just going to turn something on. Sorry.
yeah, well, just that you know, we sort of know, we know what is helpful. I mean, I'd say probably the single most important lesson in terms of emotional resilience that we need to teach young people at the moment is just letting them sit with uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
And just allowing them and not panicking and just being alongside them and not jumping in and rescuing them, because I think there's a big problem at the moment of this sort of idea that we can never be unhappy. You know, we can never find things difficult, and
Yeah.
it's, you know, rushing in to fix things. And it's a whole new mindset of understanding that, you know, there are ups and downs, life can be difficult, but that's okay. You know, stumbling blocks can be stepping stones. I came across a phrase yesterday, actually, with one of the groups I was working with. She said, a lady said to me, she said, there's no such thing as full stops, there's only commas. Which I thought was so lovely. And it's just such a different mindset to teach children that it's okay.
That is a lovely saying, actually, and it's
Yeah.
like that we need to see more of, you know, because I do
And not
believe
to be scared of feelings. You know, we've all got to have them. We don't, and actually right now, the main approach of the government, as you probably know, is this cognitive behavioral therapy. It's the main therapy offered. You get 6 to 8 week sessions of this CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive's how you think, you know, therapy and behavioral, how you behave. But
Yeah.
probably only works for around 50% of people. And a lot of people now in the psychological world feel that just addressing how you think isn't enough. You know, how you think and how you feel are completely interconnected. It's a bit like mind and body. And so for me, the most interesting work that we could be doing with our youngsters is work around feelings, accepting them, allowing them, being with them, not being frightened of them, how to manage them, all the skills of emotional regulation. And my God, my life might have been different if I'd learned some of this stuff.
These are the types of things, with my son, we do this thing where we kind of create a space, and it's usually like, we call it the shell. We create a little space, sometimes under the blanket, like a den. And this is where we discuss our feelings, and I try my best to navigate it. But the thing is, this has come from my personal traumas, me learning, and I still suffer myself. I just wish we were doing more of this stuff in the schools. So going off, you know, what you were saying, you know,
By the way, a note of optimism. I think this is beginning to be quite widely accepted, even in government circles. And I have had a few conversations that people
that's
have
really good to know.
We have actually got, exactly as you say, we've got to change our approach in the curriculum. We've got to get to this stuff.
We don't need to be filling these kids' heads with some of the things they know. I
No.
also don't believe that my 14-year-old should be picking subjects that are going to change the rest of her life. I don't think that's something a 14-year-old should be doing. You know, I think she should be learning about herself.
But I mean, maybe that goes back to my earlier point, which is I think is a theme of sort of what I feel I've learned is this idea of sort of freedom, choice, lining up with what works for you. This idea that, as you say, rather than narrowly, you're going to do 3 subjects and that's it. You know, no, maybe you're suited to doing 5 subjects. Maybe you're suited to doing music or art or something completely different. But it's just that more allowing people to sort of line up rather than having them in a very rigid structure. And then they internalize that and they think that they've got to kind of tick all the boxes, a bit like I did.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, and everybody feels like they have to be a certain way.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, did any, like, because I've read your one book that I read is really poetic, and you said the words helped you heal.
Yeah.
Did any certain belief systems help you at that time? Did you have a certain belief system that they helped pull you through, or
Yeah,
did you have beliefs
yeah,
before?
that's a really good question. I think I have written quite a lot about the sort of healing power of poetry, and when I was at my worst and suicidal, and even now, and I'm basically in good shape, but every now and again, you know, we all can find life really challenging. For me, again, it often triggers in with the physical thing of the insomnia. So if I get myself overtired or doing too much. But when I was at my worst, the words I was drawn to were really a lot of the religious poets. And I was brought up a Catholic, and my faith slightly waxes and wanes. But I'd say, in terms of the belief system, I do believe in something bigger than all of us. And the poems that I were drawn to were about a sort of what I would call a sort of benevolent universe, something bigger, but something positive. And I
Yes.
think when you're really desperate, you've got such a dark voice in your head that there's one poem I could share with you, which is, it's actually a 17th century poet, which is extraordinary in itself, because it sort of speaks to our common humanity that even back in the 17th century, people maybe
This
had.
has always been around. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of reassuring in some ways. This poet is called George Herbert, and he was a priest. And it's a poem called Love. And in the poem, really what he does is he talks about his own feelings of unworthiness, of sort of guilt, of shame. He's got an extraordinary phrase in the poem of talking about feeling guilty of dust and sin. And I think that's another reason that words are so important to me, because they, you know, an amazing description like that can actually tell you how you're feeling, it's like a gift.
Yeah.
I couldn't always explain how I felt, especially because I had a lot of baggage around, you know, I was so lucky in my job and my children, blah, blah. And I remember saying, I feel like I'm guilty of dust and sin. And it was just such a brilliant description. But anyway, in this same poem, he talks about a loving God. He doesn't actually use the word God, he uses the word love. And it's about a conversation between one person who feels unworthy, not good enough, and another person who is love, who is welcoming this person and saying, you are okay, you are lovable, because you are made in the image of God, made in the image of love. Now, I know from my work that not everybody's religious, but what I like and what I think resonates with lots of people is just this sort of idea of a sort of a bigger, more benevolent force. And you might not call that God, but it's something beyond us. And I do tap into that a lot.
Me and Matt sit kind of there, I'd say. We're very spiritual. We don't have but our beliefs are, for example, words can destroy, or they can, or they can benefit. You put negativity out, you receive negativity back. You know, we're very much like that. It's not a case of God, but yeah, we're on the same plane that we believe in something more. And I don't think it's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing.
Yeah. But we've noticed, haven't we, from a lot of conversations we had, a link between kind of trauma and trauma people have experienced, and then spirituality and kind of becoming more spiritual. I just wanted to go back a second though, you touched on therapy, because you talked about the government's main approach at the moment being CBT, and you talked about you've had normal therapy yourself as well. I just wanted to touch on that, how you found that process. Did you have to go private? Was it by the NHS? How did you find it worked for you? And how did it impact the other things you were doing, such as the medications and
Sure. Well, the first depressive episode, I didn't have any therapy. I think it wasn't so common then, and wasn't so routinely offered on the NHS. The second one, I did do CBT via the NHS. I think I did 8 sessions, but that wasn't really nearly enough for me.
Can I just add? I know someone who is a therapist, and they claim that it takes at least 21 sessions to hit.
Yeah.
So this is my other problem with this being offered on the NHS. One, it's impossible to get it, even on the NHS.
Sure.
2, so because I don't know if there's enough funding or enough resources, not sure there, but it's impossible to get. GP appointments, impossible to get, but there we are. But for a therapist, a psychotherapist I know, to say that it takes at least 20 to 20, 21 round day to get, and then we're only offering 6 to 12 maximum on the NHS, just seems a bit pointless to me.
Well, I think you make a good point. I mean, I would again say, sort of again, people are different, but I couldn't agree more that for most people, that is not going to be nearly enough. And it's not going to be nearly enough in addition because of the point I made earlier about it's basically addressing your thought patterns. So you're catastrophizing, your black and white thinking, all of which I'm quite an expert at. And I've had to, I did find it helpful, but what it didn't do was go into coping with feelings and being less scared of them and using them in more of a positive way, like a guidance system. Like actually, maybe they're not all these sort of, like, for example, if you're feeling very sad about something, that may be very useful information about trying to pivot to what actually you might be better suited to or better. So to your point, so I was not really suited to the stress of a newsroom. I was quite a good journalist in the sense I was a decent communicator and I was okay at writing, but the stress of always being available and never feeling good enough, and the Guardian ran a story and I'd missed it, and I was in an environment that was not good for me. So actually that feeling was a useful feeling, and a little bit like you, I had to get out of that world, and actually I've got a new sort of working world. And it turns out that, for example, I love teaching and I love giving workshops, I love sharing ideas. So that's a gift of mine, and I wouldn't have found it if I hadn't had to manage my emotions, if that makes any sense.
So do you think it's a case of it wasn't fulfilling your soul then? It wasn't really do you mean, did you find yourself through your trauma?
Well, what I would say is I think that we all have gifts and we have different gifts, but the world has quite a narrow view of what gifts it perceives to be valuable and beneficial.
Yes.
And I think that I was very bound up in quite a worldly narrative, and I was very preoccupied with things like status. And I wanted to say to people, oh, I work at the Times. Have you heard of the Times? Yes, well, you have heard of the Times. And I had to move off that, and I had to have my own sense of self-worth and that I was good enough. And I didn't necessarily need back to that idea of outward affirmation. So I think for me, it's yes, the soul is a nice idea, but for me, it's more specific that actually you've got different gifts, and actually finding ways that you can use your gifts and not being overly attached to other people's stories about what is an important gift. For example, it's a gift to be a good mum. And we don't really even
give that enough credit.
As value it, or even say, and I didn't, I was all about my career, and I actually love being with my children, and I think I am a good mum, but it wasn't a gift that was widely valued in the world. Perhaps, so I think I would say that it's kind of lining up with your gifts. But I really take your point that I feel incredibly lucky that I have been able to afford private therapy, and I've had a lot of it over the years, and I've been through about 3 or 4 different therapists, and I've finally found somebody who's really revolutionized my life, because she works with a lot of somatic work and a lot of energetic work and a lot of feeling work. So for example, she's called Kristen, this lady, and if I was chatting to her, she'd go, right, stop talking. Okay, how are you feeling? What are you feeling? How are you feeling about that? And
try
then
and connect you to your words.
Yeah, and she, rather than bang, bang, bang in our heads, buzz, 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 which is sort of my world and my background, is just a sort of allowing feelings and being with them and using them and enjoying them almost. Even the more difficult ones, there's something there. There's sort of like no experience without value.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think what you're saying is just resonates a lot with me, really. I wish that there was more availability, because basically what you're saying is you've been fortunate and you've still had to find the right therapist.
Yeah.
So what we offer on the NHS is really, really, I don't want to say it, but it is poor, because you're given who you're given. You're expected to deal with it, with this person. I mean, these people
and that's even if you're lucky enough to be given someone on the waiting list.
And I do think, if we could tackle it on a bigger scale, like, you know,
Yeah.
with the kids, starting with the kids, the next generations,
Oh,
we
but I
could
mean,
do
I
a
wouldn't,
lot more.
I completely agree, but I wouldn't devalue the benefit of something like what you're doing with your podcast and a kind of
Thank you.
people taking it upon themselves in sort of little there's a phrase, Burke was a conservative politician in the 18th century, but he had this phrase, little platoons, sort of little platoons, and it might not be very high profile, but in little ways all over. And I see this with some charities. So for example, I started doing a sort of poetry workshop, and it was just 3 or 4 poems that I'd found really helpful, that helped me change the story in my head, that gave me beautiful words. So there's one by a famous American poet called Emily Dickinson. It's called Hope is the Thing with Feathers, and it's about imagining that hope is always within us, like a little bird. And it's just a lovely poem. And I started sharing it with one of the groups. It was My Local Mind. So there were about 12 of us, and we met for 4 or 5 weeks in a row, and each week we'd share a few poems. And then what was so lovely is at the end of it, they said, right, well, we're keeping going. Thanks very much. And this using poetry has allowed us to unburden and be open and share. And there's that connectivity with a poet who shared, and now we're sharing as a group. And so I totally get your point that structurally we need change. We need government change. We need proper change in the education system. You know, we need change in what the NHS is offering. It's ridiculous that basically what happened with CBT was a couple of people got together who were influential in the government. And I won't say who they are, but I know exactly who they are. One of them, ironically, was an economist. And they basically got CBT through on the nod. They said, CBT is the answer. And that's the only thing the NHS is going to offer, which is patently absurd. You know, half of all people who start CBT drop out. And they say the proponents of it, and look, I'm not completely knocking it because I have altered my own thinking patterns, but half of people who start CBT drop out. And when they do the research on CBT, they only work with the people who stuck with it.
Yeah, that's true.
Other people in the therapeutic world who are offering other kinds of emotional therapy, Matt, back to your point, like, you know, some of this somatic work, some of this work linking feelings and our physicality, our mental and our physical health, and you can't get that on the NHS.
And also, I think you made a really good point earlier about things do need to be tailored to the individual, and it's about how that person needs to channel. So, for example, my ex-partner killed himself, and he was a musician.
I'm sorry, yeah.
And he was a musician, and it's only since in the last few years that I realized he was given medications, antidepressants. He was sent to therapy. He was lucky enough to be able to go private as well. But he went to therapy, and he was doing all these things that didn't really work for him. And it's only afterwards realizing that, you know, music is a form of therapy, for example. And I can see in hindsight that he wasn't channeling it in the right, his feelings in the right way. And it's like, it comes back to what you said. There are different forms of therapy.
It could be painting, it could be dancing. For my daughter, it's dancing. She does Latin ballroom.
It could be talking, and it could be there's different forms. And I think that's important. It's realizing not everyone is the same, and different things work for different people.
And actually, we've got really poor research as well, more generally, about what is effective. And even, as you say, allowing that personalized approach. So I'll give you an example. So about 5-6 years ago, the government got very excited about mindfulness for young people. And to your point about, you know, getting some of this stuff into schools. So they put in quite a big mindfulness program. And what they found is it doesn't work for young people, because they actually just go into rumination, and they're supposed to be sitting there kind of with their thoughts. And actually they were going backwards. I mean, there are some mindful techniques which seem to be more effective, which is you do things like mindful coloring at the same time as sort of allowing your thoughts. But anyway, my point more broadly is that we need a lot more research about what is effective. And the problem with the therapy game is that all the research pretty much so far has just been on the CBT. And we have got very little research on other stuff. And that's difficult for people because, you know, they don't know what's going to work, what's going to help me. And so people are very kind of beholden to, you know, well, has it got the research? What's the science? But I think that you have to be very confident that you're not boxed in. Try something. Does it see how you feel? Do you feel light? Do you feel a little bit more joyful? Do you feel heavy and it's difficult? You know, I sometimes work with people and they say, oh, I've had therapy, I'm feeling terrible after the session. I think, oh my God, well, actually, maybe that's not the best therapist for you. So yeah, I think that's been very much my philosophy, and all my books. I did another one called Walking on Sunshine, and I looked at 52 different little things you could try. And it was always
Yeah,
the
I noticed in your book you talk about doing something like, you know, the washing of the hands and all that.
yeah,
Is that because this is kind of how I pulled myself out of my bad time. For me, it was more of a pattern. I tried to do a different thing than I did before. So
yeah.
hopefully I could break that because I felt like I was in a continuous loop. Um, was it more because like you felt clean, or was it because you could focus on your thoughts when
Well,
you're doing that?
it was funny, that one, actually, because yeah, when I was doing Walking on Sunshine, I was sort of focusing on a new habit each week and seeing if that made a difference. And I'm very sensitive to smell, and I love the smell of lovely hand soaps. If you want to give me a present, you can send me some soap. Anyway,
Okay.
I wrote up this, how I personally was finding it helpful, because I was trying to be more in my body. So a little bit back to what I was talking about, feelings. So I was trying to be more alive to the scent, the feel, the water. So I was trying to make it this enjoyable moment in my day. And I did write it up, but then I got quite a lot of criticism because people said, that's classic OCD, you know, to be obsessed
Oh,
with
wow.
hand washing. But I was just stuck to my guns. And I always say, you know, my expertise comes from experience, and there's the same root to the word experience, expertise. It's the same. And I think, in a way, back to your point, Matt, of how different we all are, we mustn't be bamboozled by, just because, I don't know, the government says this, or somebody else says, you know, if you change your diet and help, you know, improve your gut health, which is probably true, you're all going to be hunky-dory. Just really keep coming back to yourself and just really feeling into it. Now, was that a helpful intervention? Did I feel a little bit lighter? You know, even like, I'm just thinking as I'm talking, and like, I'm really enjoying this chat.
Good. I'm glad because
You know, it's
I'm
sort of
really
like,
enjoying it.
yeah, I'm getting like, and I'm become so much more sensitive to so much more self-aware. So look, you can't really see, but I'm getting slight goosebumps.
Yeah, I think it's an important chat, and it's why we wanted you to come on, because we thought you'd be fantastic. I just wanted to ask, because we were talking about other therapies.
Yeah.
What's your opinion? Do you have much an opinion on cannabis related therapies?
Yeah, I don't have experience of it, so I'm a little bit wary of commenting more broadly. I
Yeah,
suppose in terms of my broader philosophy, I would say, again, you know, feel into it, allow it, be with it. If it really does it make you feel that bit calmer, that lighter, or, you know, a bit heavier, life is a bit more difficult. I don't know. I would be a little bit cautious around sort of safety, and, you know,
yeah.
maybe it's got
Because it seems to be something that's been well, now it's like medical cannabis and stuff like that for mental health, physical
yeah.
pain and all that stuff. I personally know somebody, we Matt both personally know somebody who went on the medical cannabis program, and honestly it has changed their life.
Well, that's
It
wonderful.
it
I mean,
really
I think
has.
what I would say is, broadly, it's in line with my feeling when we've just been talking about it, this sort of mind-body link. And I
Yeah.
think that's why I'm so keen on some of the nutritional approaches. And I think,
Nutrition is massive. I mean,
yeah, and it's the
I,
same thing, you know, if we can get our physical body into good shape, then that will help our mental well-being. And so,
definitely.
I mean, I don't know exactly the chemical
Um,
composition of antidepressants, or how that exactly works. I mean, nobody believes in this
yeah,
serotonin thing
but
anymore.
I was just gonna say though about nutrition, because I learned something that was it actually blew my mind the other day. So you know
Yeah.
how everyone thinks about serotonin, the happy chemical in your brain, and everyone thinks about how it's a brain chemical. Well, I learned a week ago that actually 95% of the serotonin that you make is in your gut, and
That's on the back of the book.
There we go.
I'm just like you. I was blown away by that, and I think it speaks to our sort of lack of education, and we don't understand some of these things. I'm very lucky. I've become I think my name is I think my title. You see, I've still got that old thing of needing the outward affirmation, but I'm an associate now with King's College London, and there's a wonderful Italian psychiatrist that I've been working with. He's called he's Professor Carmine Pariante, he's called, and he's been looking at people with low mood, not very serious depression, but with low mood, and supplementing their diet with omega-3s, and he's having really nice results. And that's your
I believe it.
Your mackerel and all stuff like that. And I would invite anybody listening, well, have a whirl, have a try, see how it goes.
I think we live in a society where we believe healthy eating is to lose weight, and it's not really something you can do every day. Now, I just wanted to add to this conversation. Sorry to butt in. I've had a gastric bypass. And since I had a gastric bypass and I lost all my weight, etc., I am very sensitive to food. And there are times that I can tell you now, that's when I made a link to food, because I physically altered my body. So when certain food enters my body, I can get very unwell physically, and then I mentally hurt, and then I physically hurt, and then a whole spiral begins. I have had some of my, looking back when I started keeping a diary of what I was eating, drinking, what I was thinking, especially during COVID, we were all going through a lot, and I honestly, I just had my jab. I was determined to kind of keep a diary. And I could see that just by making little changes in my food actually really helped me massively.
And I think I'm excited because I did my Happy Kitchen book in 2017, and that came out of a conversation with my GP. So after the second episode, when I was still on the medication, I was trying all the different things. I'd done the CBT, and I went to see my doctor, and she said, "How are you getting on?" I said, "Well, not that great." And she wrote on a prescription pad 3 happy foods. And
really?
she actually wrote on this prescription pad, she put dark greeny vegetables, oily fish, so that's back to the omega-3s, which is the work I've been doing more recently at King's College London, and dark chocolate, because it's got magnesium, which is calming, it's got some phytoestrogens. And I said, "This is amazing." And I said, "Can you tell me more?" And she said, "Well, I don't really, it's still an early area of research, and so that's why I went ahead and tried to find out more about it in the book." But I think that, as you say, that the first step starts with that self-awareness and becoming more conscious of, if you do go and eat a McDonald's and then another one and then another one, how do you actually feel? And just being aware of that. And
we live in a world of fast food and processed food. I mean, not being funny, we even were buying steak in Tesco's and we didn't even know what was steak and what was horse. Do you know what I mean? We could all be doing more to maybe live a bit. I believe we could eat a bit less meat personally, but I'm not a vegetarian at all. But I just think we don't need to be consuming as much meat as we do, it's not healthy. If we weren't living in this man-made world, we would be hunting and we would be eating a lot less meat, more of these other things, more fish probably, and maybe more greens and other things. For me personally, it goes back to that, and this is kind of the things we need to bring back in as a whole for the mental health and physical health.
So when I do good mood food workshops, and what I find is that the best message, which I sort of philosophically and sort of psychologically think makes total sense, is that if you tell people not to do things, they're drawn to them because it's kind of exciting. It's like if you say it's a rule, the first thing your children are going to do, try and break it.
Yeah.
But if you turn it around and say, let's add some stuff in, let's have more variety. So not just if you always have your chicken on a Sunday, we'll have something different, have a I don't know, bit of venison or something different, because some of the studies we looked at, so I did the book with a nutritional therapist who was also a doctor, and she was pretty smart actually, Alice McIntosh, she's a friend of mine. And we looked at some research that said that the average person on a kind of classic high fat, high sugar Western diet probably eats around 20 things each week on repeat. Whereas back in the day, and again, it's a little bit tenuous saying we're exactly like our, you know, descent, whatever, our ancestors on the savannah running around and a lion catching us. But it seems as though our digestive system is set up for much more variety.
Yeah.
But my point is that that's a really lovely message to share with people, which is not don't do this, don't do that. It's like add in, you know, choose some different veg.
Yeah, and actually, I had a workshop with a psychiatrist a week or two ago, and she was talking about habit building and
Nice.
how a lot of people tend to, especially with diets and things as well, look at what they can take away from their diet, from their habit. And are you both there? Sorry, I look like you froze then. So most people look at what they can take away from their diet, or look at what habit they can cut, and that's where a lot of people tend to fall down, because the more effective thing to do would be to do what you normally do, then do the old habit that you would normally do, and then add in the new habit, so you're sandwiching it in. And then over time, you can remove the habit that you wanted to remove. But before you remove it, you build in the
Take the
new.
other. That's good, that
That's
is.
nice. And it's sort of less stressful, isn't it, as well? So that you're not sort of rushing it. You're just giving yourself time to.
So
I
for
think
me, I related it to Red Bulls. I'm awful because I don't like coffee, and I need my caffeine fix. I'm awful for Red Bulls, and I know how bad they are for my health, my heart, and all of it.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I'm trying to reduce. So the way I'm doing it now is I'm getting a naked smoothie and the Red Bull, and I'm having the Red Bull, then the naked smoothie, and then my intention is to slowly wean off the Red Bull. But I've had to add in the habit before taking the bad habit away.
Right, we'll have to pause again and catch up, and then we'll let her know if you actually achieved it.
Yeah.
I like some of the habit formation as well. It's just like you could just kind of like, again, make it easy. So like, for example, I put a pair of trainers by the front door. And then like every time I go out, I think, oh, there's the trainers. Oh yeah, I must remember. Be a good idea to do a bit of exercise.
Yeah.
Or even I've tacked the habit to being on the phone. So I try, even though it's lovely to see everybody's faces on the Zoom, I try on work calls in the day. I'm trying to get off screen calls, just because if I'm just on my phone, I've got my trainers, then I got a habit that, okay, I've got a half an hour call. I'll walk around the block, maybe even get down to the local park. And that's a new habit that I'm attaching to being on the phone rather than sitting on my screen. So, you know, but I like, that's very good, the idea you hold on to one and then you put the next one, you sandwich it next to it till you're ready.
Like you put them together and then
Sandwich it, the bad in between. Yeah.
It's good, that is, Matt. I didn't know that.
Yeah, because you've already got the bad habit, and if you add the new habit that you want to build in with it, you'll automatically do it with the bad, and then it's a case of removing the bad once you've built in the new. So, and I think there was something about you can only ever really change two things in your habits at once. If you try to change more than two, that's where you'll fall down, because your brain can only really make two changes, whether it's positive or negative. Two changes is kind of the max.
And are there any habits or ways of thinking you're trying to change, as well as the practical things? Are there any sort of psychological shifts?
I mean, yeah, so I've built in mindfulness. I've built in all those sorts of practices into my day now. And again, I've done it, building them into, so it's not a bad habit, it's a neutral. I tend to have quite a lot of either a hot tub or a bath. I'm in water quite a lot. So then I built the meditation into that habit. And I have used it to alter my ways of
So one of the things that I'm doing at the moment, which I'm finding really helpful, is just having various phrases back to sort of gentle language. So sort of, you know, your inner critic, but finding a gentle voice in your own head. So I had a bad patch about 10 days ago, actually, because I'm not very good at staying with people, because I still have this insomnia. And I don't know if you've been unwell mentally. I think it's almost like the tide goes out or whatever, the other way around. Can't think of the right image, but you're left with these little sort of islands where you still you're still vulnerable. So one for me is flying. I'm really bad at turbulence, and I just see myself, and so I have to be careful with that. And then another one is going away to stay with people and not sleeping well, because I feel a lot of social pressure to be up in the morning all bright and breezy and there at breakfast and how are you, and did you sleep well? Oh yeah, I slept really well, and I might have been up all night. Anyway, so I did have a bad night about 10 days ago, and one of the things I'm doing at the moment in this habit shifting is I just like a few phrases. So when that happens, or if you are feeling a pain, or the old stuff comes back, I just go, just be easy with it. Just be easy with it. Just be easy with it. Just tell it right, just be easy with it. And that word easy somehow is really working well.
I would say my habits at the minute for changing things for the last year for me, it was a thought process habit more than anything. It was, is it truthful? Is it factual?
Yeah.
Is it important? And they're the three things that kind of got me out of my bad places personally. So
What's the difference between truthful and factful?
So like if I don't really know how to explain it, but for me, when people say things and I don't know if is that their truth or is that someone else's truth? I always just kind of sit back and think, okay, this person may believe what they're saying, but okay, where did this thing come from? And then, like I kind of don't take things at that value anymore. Like, because I used to let things come to me and it would just hit me and it would affect me massively mentally because I'm so sensitive. So I kind of built a
like
wall.
almost keep a space, a kind of like
this is my space.
Visualization of a kind of like a golden.
This is my little circle, like my space.
Or a golden cloak. I sometimes do that as well.
It's like a protection thing. So now I don't let people in unless, like, so if I don't engage in certain conversations with people now, if I feel like, if it doesn't come in naturally or if it makes me feel odd, I push it out and I'll have a think about it. Is it factual? Is it, could it be true? Is it their truth? Is it, do I believe in that or not? And,
it sounds
did it really happen? Is it important?
It sounds more like what you're starting to do is put yourself in maybe their shoes and acknowledge how they might be feeling about something, about what they've said that maybe has upset you. And then you're also looking at the situation objectively, taking away their feelings and your feelings, and kind of just looking at the facts.
I got so wrapped up in other people's stuff at some point because I run a beauty business and all these women, they come in and you've got, you got all lots of different stories. Like, for example, one lady came in and came in for a massage, but she didn't actually come in for a massage. She actually came in just to cry for an hour because she was being abused by her husband, and I could never have massaged her if I tried because she was covered in bruises and it absolutely traumatized me. And these are the type of things I've been having all in my career, all my life. And I got to a point last year, I was like, right, is it important? Is it going to affect me? I kind of had this new thought process. So for me, my habits have changed in the sense of like how I think about things. And I box things now. It's a bit like a dartboard. I'm in the middle. This is my close space. This is my next space. And I kind of pin people there where I think they should be. And ever since I did that, I feel a lot better.
I think that must be right, that, as you say, keeping a bit of a sense of space, so avoiding that codependence, so picking your emotion off from the other person, but also that it is really almost always about them, because it's always about us, it's about them too. I think another kind of sort of, back to language, I'm finding it also very helpful at the moment to avoid right, wrong. So they're wrong, I'm right, I'm wrong, they're right. And I think when I look back at being unwell, on some level, I thought I was wrong. And it's very judgmental. And there's a lot of right, wrong in society more broadly. And I think the way I now try to think of it is it's just different. I mean, obviously some things are wrong, Hitler's wrong. But on the whole, most people, they don't get up in the morning thinking, I'm going to make you miserable. But there may be all sorts of other things going on for them. They're out of whack for some reason. They're tired, they're hungry, they're hangry, or whatever's going on for them. But making them wrong actually I find makes me feel worse.
Causes a negative impact, and it's about the ripple effect.
Yeah, and
isn't
also
it?
then it if they're wrong, then I can be wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be wrong or right and just me.
Yeah, you want to be you and
yeah.
be able to live like that. And this is what me and Matt say. There's been times that me and Matt have had situations and I've gone, it is what it is. And
Yeah.
we let it go.
Yeah.
We just say, it is what it is, Matt. You know, and we laugh at each other, don't we, Matt? Because we're like, how can you argue with that, Matt? It is what it is. Just shut up and move on. And we move on, don't we, Matt?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Actually,
That's the way we deal with things.
if you rewind to stigma, and one of the problems with mental health is that, you know, the essence of stigma is this right wrong narrative. And if you come back to the fact that it is what it is, I think people have got a much better chance of recovery, because when I was really unwell, you know, I did want to recover, but if I had just had much more acceptance and allowance, and, you know, I'm not wrong here, you know, the fact is I had no concept of looking after myself or my mental health, or even knowing what that was. And it wasn't anybody's fault. I wasn't wrong. I was just a, you know, 30-something-year-old who didn't know anything about the subject. Well, that's okay. You know, it's not wrong to be that person. So I think that held me back for many years.
I think as well, some of this is acceptance. Some things you
Yeah.
can't change.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really helped me heal, was when I used to think of things in my past and I should sit there and I should mull it over. I'm like, why did this have to happen to me? Why does it always be like me? Why? All I did was attract that negative energy, and then
Yeah.
it gave negative energy back, and it was just constantly coming back and forth. And in the end, I just
Yeah.
went, do you know what? I can't change it. And as soon as I
Yeah.
accepted certain things that happened to me and thought it is what it is,
I think that's massive. I mean, I like an extra twist on that, which I found very helpful. So while, as you say, accepting we can't always change things, I quite also like the idea of honoring the desire. So give you an example. My husband, he always reloads the dishwasher. However I put the dishwasher in, he reloads it because he's very
the best.
nice and he likes it.
He's the best.
And it drives me mad. I really would wish that he would be different and just accept how I load the dishwasher. Okay. So the sort of twist on acceptance is that I also want to honor my desire that I would like it to change. I don't want to shut that down. I don't want to make myself wrong for wishing that he would load the dishwasher.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
You know what I mean? So, but I can also accept that I can't change it, and he's always going to load the dishwasher in his way, and that's okay. But
I'm sure there's things that you do that he can't, you know, you.
Yeah, well, that's very nice of you. I just like the thing of it's honoring what you feel, and you're not wrong to feel it, while it also accepting you can't change something. You know,
I think that's massive.
extra level of it.
Definitely.
If that makes any sense. Yeah.
You can easily get into a rut of why me, you know, and it's not. It's what made me really unwell for most of my life.
Yeah.
I truly
And
believe
also,
that.
I think, and that makes me also think of something else, which I find really helpful, which is this idea of don't spend too much time on reasons. I think reasons can be a real red herring.
Yeah.
Because quite often we don't really know the reasons. And when we've decided on a reason, you know, we backfill it with evidence. And then our minds are really clever and it chucks a whole load of evidence into this reason, which may or may not be the reason. And then we have to be right.
Yeah.
So then you get into the right wrong thing. And so I've become more and more interested in the idea that, you know, I think when I was younger, I told you my story of why I was so unwell. And I think when I was younger, I would have told you the reason was that, you know, I had this super stressful job. I didn't understand mental health, you know, and after a load of therapy, maybe there was a load of stuff from my childhood. There were a lot of narratives about right, wrong. There was a bit of trauma going on. There was all sorts of things. But I'm never going to know for sure exactly why my life blew up. And maybe that is not a good use of my time.
Yeah.
Because I could go mad trying to figure out what these reasons are.
Yeah.
And, you know, I wrote a whole book saying that I think these are the reasons. And I probably would write it completely differently now because I've been on this another 10 years down the line in mental health. And And
Well,
sometimes
that's
when
really
you,
amazing. That's progression, and that's healthy, and that's natural. And I think that's
yeah,
actually good that you acknowledge that too, you know, that you are not the same. We are not the same as we were last year, the
no,
year before that. And again, it's okay to change.
yeah.
It's okay to change and embrace that change.
You'll probably find that on this podcast that you'll oh, I've probably got to go
Thank you.
free. But
Thank you so much for your
no,
time,
Rachel,
Rachel.
any last thoughts or anything
yeah. Just before you
things
go,
up? Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that you are an ambassador for the Rethink Mental Illness, SANE, and the Counselling Foundation and Head Talk. So we'll put the links in the description.
Oh, well, that'd be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, and if any of the viewers have related to this, please feel free to share it with anyone that you think it might help. Hit that follow button, it'll help. And also check out the links in the description
Yeah.
for the charities.
Well,
Thank you so much.
that's really kind. It's been so fun talking to you. I think we've all
Thank
lined
you.
up with what we want to do. So we're on the road.
Yes, thank you very much, and enjoy the
Not at
rest of your
all.
day.
It's been fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Bye,
Rachel.
All right
Rachel.
then. Bye-bye. Thanks for
Ta-da.
having me.
Not a problem.